Hello and welcome, guys. Thank you once again for joining me for our Facebook Lives. Tonight we're talking about things that parents can learn and teach their children. This is our segment on parents. So for a couple days, I'm just taking time to check in with the parents just to make sure we're all right. Last night I did a wellness check, just checking in, making sure everybody's good. And tonight we're going to talk about things that parents can learn and teach their children. Now, these are just practical ideas or suggestions that I'm just throwing out there. I don't necessarily know what you are doing, but whatever it is, I'm sure you are doing a great job. Now, we know that during this pandemic, our families are just a little bit closer these days. We're having to stick around the house, and we're still having to try to keep everything together. Now, we know that that can take a toll upon our parent-child relationships, husband-wife relationships, partnerships, whatever. We just know that even working from home can be a challenge. But we know that there's always something that we can do to help ease the load for our families or for our loved ones. So tonight I just want to share some ideas with you, what parents can learn and teach their children during these times. Don't forget, as you log on, to like and share this video. Also, if you're catching the replay on YouTube or SoundCloud, I appreciate you joining me as well. And I hope that things are going well for you. Also, guys, if you have a comment, you can leave a comment or your question there in the comment box, and I'll be glad to interact with you. All right, guys, some things that parents can learn and teach their children. Number one is parents can learn to ask for help. And they model this to children by realizing that there is a need. When we have needs, sometimes parents, we tend to feel shame or prideful, and we're reluctant sometimes to seek help. But there's nothing wrong with asking for help. And when children see us being vulnerable in those vulnerable times and reaching out for resources to help us, this also teaches them a sense of humility and not being ashamed to ask for help. We know that our ancestors were very proudful people, but one thing that they did do is they had a circle of community, a circle of friends that they looked out for one another. And it wasn't that they'd reach out for help or they needed something and it was heard all over town. If it spread it over town, then it was certainly kept quiet and certainly away from our children. So one of the greatest lessons that we can teach our kids, especially during this time, is that it's okay to ask for help, because they're going to see us struggle through some things. And sometimes we think that they're not watching or that they're not aware of everything that is going on, but they are. They're watching us. And what better way to teach the lesson by modeling the behavior in front of them? There are resources that pop up every day. And when you need those resources, that's what they're there for, to help us through this difficult time. Now is not a time to be so prideful or to suffer in silence, because we're all going through, we all need help sometime along the way. You know, it may be not be something material you need help with. It may be filling out something, a grant paper or something. It could be any little thing, but don't be afraid to ask for help. That's a very important lesson we can teach our kids while we're home with them, and especially preparing them for what's after this, because they're going to go back to school and they're going to go back to the different environments. And if you have a child that was already struggling in school, did you know that part of the reason they could be struggling is because they're afraid or ashamed to ask for help? So what if teaching them how to ask for help without being ashamed or prideful was going to make the difference in their academic future? So that's something that we need to think about. And some of you guys have kids that are graduating and getting ready for college and things like that. And there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of steps associated with that. Have you reached out to somebody that can help you with that process? There's financial aid, there's scholarships, there's all kinds of things that you may find yourself needing assistance with. All I'm saying is to ask for help. Find somebody that you can trust or that you can confide in with the things you need help with without feeling like you're going to be blasted on Front Street. So that's a good, valuable lesson we can teach our kids while we're home with them. It's just to ask for help. Another lesson that's important to teach our kids is to never stop learning. Never stop learning. I know I've heard several times throughout the day, whether it was on a social media post or maybe video or something, where people are saying and expressing that they are bored. It's not a time to be bored. And these are coming from us parents. Out of all people, I can't think of a dull moment when I'm in the house with my family. My mind's just not that idle, guys. So to say that I was bored, then that would mean that what I'm really saying is that I'm unfulfilled and that I haven't tapped into my purpose. So if you find yourself in a situation to where you're feeling like you're bored at home, this is one of the lessons that you need to take a hold of. Never stop learning. If the kids pick up on you being bored and not learning something, that's kind of the nature that they're going to take on. But if they see you engaged in some kind of webinar or learning something or picking up a book or just expanding your knowledge, they're going to get the message through watching you that learning is important. And guys, learning is a lifetime. If you graduated school and you just said, well, I graduated and that's enough, I done had all I can stand, we should be learning something every day. That's what makes life so abundant for us. Just learning and expanding our knowledge and our mindset. And hey, it may even start with just you sitting down with your kids while they're doing their lessons and let them teach you. Did you know that if your kids have a math assignment or a reading assignment and you really don't have an idea, if you sit there with them and say, well, I don't really know nothing about this, you can kind of make a joke out of it. I don't really know nothing about this. Can you teach me how to do this? That opens up their mind. That gets them excited about learning, because now what they think is that they're teaching mommy and daddy something. And that's a whole new dynamic now Because where is it they would probably dread wanting to do that homework or that paperwork? Now they're excited and engaged with it because they believe that they're teaching you something. And a lot of times, depending on what it is, they are. They are teaching us something new. So that is a way that we can get in with them and really engage with them and make it exciting. Let them be your teacher. Let them know that learning is a lifelong process and it never ends. Another thing, number 3, that we parents can learn and teach our children is to assume responsibility for our actions. Now is not the time to blame the government, the landlord, the bill collectors. Now is not the time to blame. Now is the time to assume responsibility for where we are and teach the kids. Because this may have seemed like it happened overnight, but preparation time has been going on for decades. Every day is a day of preparation. There's so many things that as heads of the household that we could have had in place and should learn to have in place. If we don't, now is the time to learn it, to put it in place so that when things like this come up, we won't be so overwhelmed. Now, we know eventually sometimes our wells run dry. We understand that. But there ought to be some water in the well to help us at least get past a certain time so that we won't be so overwhelmed with the things that comes at us from day to day. Because we know that even though we go through things, life still happens. It still happens to us. Life still goes on the outside. And there are a lot of things that we cannot control. We've all heard that saying, when it rains, it pours. So when it rains, it pours. This is what this is all about. So we take the responsibility for whatever it is that we have and have not done. And they hear us having good, healthy conversations and not conversations of pointing fingers and blaming and making excuses for our situation being as it is. So we know that being that we live in a poor state here in Oklahoma, in some of the poorest counties here in Oklahoma and Northeast Texas, we know that sometimes we just have it hard. Sometimes there's not enough money to make ends meet. So we are well aware of that. But we're also fortunate enough to have some of the best resources here in our areas. So it just goes back to what I said in the beginning, not reluctant to ask for help. You have to ask for help. It's the only way that we can reach out and help one another. And there's good people everywhere, and sometimes all people have to offer sometimes are their resources or gifts to you. So assume responsibility for your actions and have good, healthy conversations about it. If you're struggling or if you're in a situation to where things seem like they're getting worse, that's a conversation that you can have, a healthy conversation that you can have with kids. Because one of the things I find is that, and I was guilty of this, raising kids, I didn't discuss a lot of things I went through. I went through it in silence. So I suffered through a lot of things in silence and didn't really share it with my girls. So when we do that, we do them a disservice because they think in their minds that life is perfect. So they don't think we ever go through anything. So being able to share that with your children, especially during times like this, helps expand their perception of life, that life is not always a bed of roses, it's not always sunshine, but it kind of gives them a problem, and then they begin to explore solutions with you by assuming that responsibility, and then they take those skills and apply it to other areas of their life. So they won't run from the problems, and they won't use excuses and blame when they come against oppositions, but they'll learn to use healthy communication skills and be able to problem solve when we do that. Now, the thing, setting goals. Parents can learn to set goals and teach it with their children. Now, I shared some time ago that my niece and her friends had got together and created this vision board. Well, I'm thinking that that's a good way to learn how to do one and have an activity there in the house with your family. Setting that vision board. Where do you see yourself in the next year, in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? And being able to come together and grab some of those old magazines or look on line and print off some pictures and to draw. You'll just see all kind of talents just pouring out of your family, and you can also kind of see the dynamics of how they're thinking if you're able to learn what it is to set goals and put it on paper, something tangible. It can be a family activity, guys. I think that is an awesome idea. Now, me and my girls, we talk about goals, but I don't know that we've ever sit down and written them out. But that's what I find myself doing now, because I learned what it is to set reasonable goals, realistic goals. And so now I want to write it down so I can see it, and then I can hold myself accountable. And guys, what that does, when we're looking a year down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, that gives us hope. That gives us something to press forward to. So now all of a sudden, right now doesn't look so bad. Right now doesn't look so boring. I have goals, and now I need to be thinking about the steps that I need to get to reach those goals. Financial literacy. Financial literacy is something that we can learn as parents. We haven't always done everything right when it comes to finances. Finances hadn't always been a healthy talk in our households. And we know that finances is probably one of the number one causes of conflict within the family, especially if we're in a relationship or we're married, or we have children that are depleting our pocketbooks, and we haven't put them on budgets, and we haven't necessarily learned to budget, and our money tends to flow through our fingers. Financial literacy is important to the family. Now is a good time to look at a budget. What if this crisis continued to linger on for another 6 months, another year? What if it's not going away? What if we're going to have to adapt to a lifestyle to where most of our time is going to be confined to the house? How are we going to generate that income? And how are we going to spend it when we generate it? How are we going to make our money work for us? So this is a conversation that can go on. The parents can lead this conversation by saying, we have this amount coming in. This is what we need. Needs to go there. Financial literacy, guys. All it takes is just sitting there, looking at it, and being intentional with your finances. And especially for the parents that have kids that are graduating and getting ready to go off to college. Now is the time to teach them about spending the money and applying for those credit cards and all that, and the student loans. And now is the time to look at that. This is all financial literacy. So if you take the time to learn about these things now, it won't be such a big headache or a big surprise later when it comes knocking at the door. So financial literacy is important to our families. And I was just fortunate enough that before all this got so far out of hand that I had begun to set a budget. I had to reestablish and go back and look at my budget again when the crisis started so that I could see what's coming in, see what's going out, where we can cut corners, and what do we need to put up in savings, what we need to invest, all of that. It all makes a difference. And when the earlier you can teach your child, the better and smarter they're going to be when it comes to their own finances. Right now, it's our finances a lot of times. But when it's theirs, we want them to be able to make good choices. So giving them a budget, and when that budget runs out, they can't have any more until it's time for it to roll back around. You know, when our money runs out, we have to wait to payday. Sometimes that's another 2 or 3 weeks down the line. So now is the time to learn about financial literacy and then teach it to our kids. Another thing is as parents, and it's more on a serious side of things. Now is the time we need to learn about life and death. Learning what it is about life and death and how they are connected, and how now is the time while we're living that we need to start planning for death. Because we don't know where death is. We already know that. And I know this is a little more on the serious side of things. But if we're already in a financial situation to where the money is running out, now is the time to make sure that we look at what happens if death occurs. And this is a discussion for the entire family. This is something that we need to get the kids involved in. We need to be sure that we're open and prepared to answer their questions. We need to make sure that there's not only a life insurance policy on us as the parent, but also to make sure that there is a valid life insurance policy on the children as well. And they need to be involved in the process. They need to be involved in the conversation. Parents, it just makes it so much easier to have the conversation and know that we've allowed opportunity to answer their questions. It just makes the whole life and death situation a little easier to handle or to cope with in the event that a crisis does occur. Now, also on the life side of things, we know that sometimes it's not about death. Sometimes life throws us curveballs like sickness or injuries or other traumatic situations that may not result in death, but it results in a life-altering situation. So if something happens to my husband and we don't have that income anymore, what happens? How does our family move on from there? What kind of savings do we have? What kind of investments do we have in place? What kind of insurances do we have in place? How would we take care of him if something happens? And vice versa. What happens if something happens to mom? What happens if something happens to one of the kids? All kind of situations. Now is the time to really look at life and death and have those conversations. Now, we know that we don't hope any heartaches or traumas or tragic events come to our families, but we have to have the conversation because we know that Life happens, guys. We know that it happens, and it don't necessarily happen like we see it all to happen. Sometimes it catches us on the blind side. So having these conversations with your children just makes it a little more bearable when situations out of our control comes up. Okay? All right, guys. Also, a message from the parents out there who have grown children and not the children that we're still raising, but our grown children. Our grown children say they just want us to just leave them alone and let them do whatever it is that they're due. All right, so that may be the case. That's just a public service announcement from our adult children who know more than we do at this time. So with that being said, my advice to you as parents, just make sure that you have a life insurance policy in place. That's my spiel on that one. Let them live their lives, and whatever be will be. And you go to sleep and rest well at night, guys. All right. I hope you guys have a good night. We'll talk to you tomorrow.